All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about ball bearings and the installation of ball bearings onto a shaft. Now, there's other installations like into housings and things, but we're just going to start here. And before we even start, there's a few other things that I want to talk about. I want to talk about the different types of ball bearings. Yeah, so I'm not going to get into all the different types, but just generally, I have open, shielded, and sealed. So open is I can see the race, the cage where the balls actually are. Okay, that's the open. I can also have a shielded, which may be hard to see, but there's actually a metal shield right here on both sides. It can have one shield, it can have two. And then, of course, they're sealed, and this has actual, usually it's black, but sometimes it's red, other colors, but it's a rubber seal around here to help with debris and moisture as well. So those are the different types of just regular ball bearings. And when I say regular, you'll understand later on what we're talking about. Now, this right here is not the only way that you can see the installation of a bearing onto a shaft, but this is not uncommon. I have this, it's essentially a W nut, but it's a spanner nut, W nut, whatever you want to call it, that went on the end of the shaft along with a retainer. And these two work into tandem. What happens is that on the backside, which is difficult for you to see, but there is a key in the shaft, and you'll see here there is a corresponding key on the actual this retainer as well, so it doesn't allow it to move very much at all. And then, of course, in conjunction with this nut right here lining up with one of those little tabs, you can bend that into place and make sure that the nut won't back off and your bearing pops off. So let's take a look at this very quickly. I'm going to tighten this up here. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and grab the shielded bearing because we're going to use the open bearing for something else. And what I'm going to do is put it on here on the shaft. Now, the very first thing, I want to make sure that everything is pretty darn straight, because if I don't make sure it's straight and I go putting forces on there, I can really cause some issues for myself. If you have a large enough press, you could actually put something on here and press this down. But right now what we're going to do is we're going to use our rubber mallet, and we're going to use this mandrel here. Now, this mandrel is designed specifically, and when I say designed, the diameters are such that, one, it won't scar the shaft because there's a big enough hole in here that it could pass around the shaft. But two, it has the right diameter to where it can put all of the energy onto the race that is in contact with the interference fit that I'm working with. Okay, what are you talking about and why? Look, here's the problem. If I take this bearing here and I want to put it on the shaft, and all my force right here needs to go onto the shaft, and yet I beat out here, I am putting energy on this, which then transfers it to the balls, and then transfers it to the inner race, and then ultimately into that inner race. And you could cause bearing damage. So whatever I'm pressing in is what I want to push on. So if I'm pushing this onto a shaft, I want to push on this inner race. If I'm pushing this into an outer housing, I want to push on this outer race. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about as far as the mandrel. So I'm going to set that mandrel up, and I'm going to gently tap this down. Sounds like I got a nice little seat there. So now it looks like my bearing is all the way down, and now I want to retain it. So I'm going to put this retainer on here, and then I'm going to go ahead and start my nut and put this all the way down. All right. Now I get this all the way down, and you'll notice that this is not a hex nut. It's going to require a spanner wrench, and this particular style has a hook on here, and it's going to hook into the corresponding slot. And I'm going to tighten this thing up until it's good. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to really pay attention to what one of these little tangs lines up with what one of my slots here. And I'm going to keep cranking this around just enough to where it lines up very good. Now, here's what you want to see. You want to see a situation where that lines up with this, and you'll never guess what we're going to do next. We're going to take that, and we're going to actually use pliers or whatever other method, and we're going to bend this. And this is horrible. I'm just trying to show for the camera, but I'm going to bend that in there. And so now that that's there, this can't move without turning the washer, and the washer is connected to the shaft via the slot. So that right there is something that you will expect in industry. All right, now taking it off. What we're going to do is we're going to put this down here, and I'm going to tighten this back up so I actually have something to work with again. I'm going to do the exact opposite. I'm going to get in here. If I can do it with pliers, great. If I need to use like a punch and something else because I've made too much of a mess of it, then that's fine as well. But essentially what you want to do is just get that tab bent back out, and then get your same spanner wrench and grab a hold of that. So my vise is moving, and loosen that up. That comes off. we're going to remove this. Okay, that comes off, and then we can pull the bearing off. Now, pulling a bearing off, if we had to tap it on, chances are that we're going to have to find some way to pull it off of here. And this is one of many ways. Okay, this right here is a bearing separator and a bearing puller. Okay, what is everything that I'm looking at here? All right, well, let's talk about that very quickly. I'm going to disassemble this slightly so that we can put this on. I'm going to take this puller section off, pull it out of the way, and I'm going to have my bearing separator. And then these right here are essentially tie rods to tie my puller to my bearing separator. Now, the bearing separator, okay, should have long bolts or studs, if you would, that you can adjust for various sizes. It has this portion here to where it goes down to a very thin edge, and then a flat portion up here. Now, in this particular case, the flat portion needs to go up against my bearing because, again, I don't want to rotate this around and cause the outside of that bearing to go here and then put all that force on the outside of the bearing. I want it as close as I can to where it's actually stuck onto the shaft. So again, this side is going to go up, and so that I can put my force exactly where I would like to put it, and that is on that inner race because, again, it is stuck onto that shaft. So I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to kind of bring it in, and then I'm just going to go ahead and wind these things in as quickly as I can for the purposes of this video. And I'm not going to make it tight, though. And why am I not going to make it tight? Well, because right now it should only really be touching the shaft, and if it's touching the shaft, then as I'm pulling up, it's going to tear up the shaft. So I'm going to back this off ever so slightly to make sure that I have a little bit of play there. And then what I can do is simply take my puller, and I may have to make some adjustments here, which it looks like I do. Back this off, and I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that I put a washer on, put a hex nut, washer, hex nut. And none of this stuff has to be perfectly tight. You're going to know how tight or loose you need it depending on how much force you need. And then once that's up and it looks reasonably level, that's the other thing that's kind of important. If it doesn't look level, then you're going to want to make sure that you adjust these things to where it's pulling straight, because if not, you're going to cause some issues. And then as I crank this thread down, it is essentially pulling the bearing right off the shaft. And bam, that's where I get the force to remove the bearing from the shaft. Okay. Now, next video, we're going to do the same very thing, but what we're going to do is we're going to do it with a different method using heat.